Good morning. Good morning. Yeah. Okay, all right. I'm talking right into the microphone. Good morning. Welcome to the 2019 Martha's Vineyard Book Festival. My name is Sue Ellen Lazarus. I'm the founder of the festival. Thank you all for coming out early. I know that in order to make it here into a seat by 8:30 and get parked, that meant you were up on a Sunday morning at about 7. So we appreciate we appreciate your perseverance. This is our eighth. This is the 8th festival, and 2 years ago we do this every other year. 2 years ago we did Meet the Press Chillmark style, and here we are again with Jim and Rita. We are honored that they came and did this for us. It allowed us to continue the tradition, but do it even better. So thank you both for being here. I just wanted to make a few announcements, and what I really want to say is thank you for your support of the festival. This happens the way we're able to make this free and bring all of the authors here and put up tents and do sound is because we have sponsors who make it possible. So the people in the front rows who make this happen, who become our sponsors, enable us to do it. So they are your enablers today, and a big round of applause to them. We also get grants. The Mass Cultural Council, the Cape Cod 5 Savings Bank, Martha's Vineyard Bank, they all provide grants to us. And then we have a number of corporate sponsors. Also, the Vineyard Gazette, the event on Friday night. The Vineyard Gazette, you've seen the supplement that the Gazette does. The Gazette makes it for us to be able to advertise in that for free is because the Gazette is our sponsor. And that's how people know about what we do. So it's a vital role that they play in this. And Bunch of Grapes Bookstore, to order books for 35 authors and stock them in quantities, when you're in your busiest season, is an amazing undertaking. Please support the bookstore and buy the books and support the authors. With that, I'm going to thank you all. I hope you have a terrific day. There's programs. There's going to be things happening in every tent. We hope you have the perseverance to stay through the day. We got a lot of food this year, so people would have the strength to endure the full day. So we expect to see you here at 4:30 too. And I'll be watching, I promise you. So I'm going to turn it over to Jamie Sanford. And the other thing I should say is we have an amazing group of volunteers. They spend their day here. They've been working, rehearsing, practicing. So big round of applause to thank them. Thank you.
We're so grateful to you, Sue. Thank you, Sue Ellen. A couple more housekeeping. One, there's some wonderful bags that have been created for you and your purchasing pleasure. There's a survival kit for $40. If you have too many bags and water bottles at home, you can just give cash. There's some wonderful food vendors we have this year. Please support them. Orange Peel Bakery, Mary's Lemonade, Scottish Bakehouse, Chef Dion, Chef Amy Johnson. Please support them. The author will be taking questions from the audience at the end of the discussions. You see the 2 mics. Please, no soliloquies, very concise questions. The rest of the audience will be grateful for that. Again, a reminder, the author will be signing books at the book signing tent immediately following, so make your way there. Don't accost Jim Acosta. And
I've never heard that before.
Okay. Thank you, Rita Braver, for being here. 9-time Emmy Award winner. Rita Braver is a national correspondent for CBS News' CBS Sunday Morning, where she reports on everything from arts and culture to politics and foreign policy. She has interviewed presidents, cabinet secretaries, and celebrities, and reported on topics ranging from the assassination of Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin to the Clinton White House to the rise of political correctness on campus. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, and thank you all for showing up this morning. We appreciate it. I was told that I was supposed to have a short introduction of Jim, but then everybody else has long introductions, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about Jim before we get started. He grew up in the Virginia suburbs. His dad was a Cuban immigrant. He has won many, many awards for his journalism. He worked at CBS News for a while, but our paths never really crossed there. That's because he was doing real work and I was working for Sunday Morning. I know that you're all here because you know about the work he has done as chief White House correspondent for CNN. He was their political correspondent before that. He covered the Iraq War. He has covered hurricanes, and so, you know, for those of us who work in journalism, we appreciate somebody who has worked his way to the top and not just come in on his good looks, which, you know, I think you could have done. You could have done that.
I probably should have done that.
I should also disclose that your lawyer is Robert Barnett, my husband, so congratulations on your good judgment. But don't expect me to let you off the hook.
Oh gosh.
And you
Call
are
Bob in.
and to show how really incestuous this place is, you are staying while you're out here with my close friends from California, Norman and Diane Blumenthal. Diane is Sue Ellen's sister, and Norm is her brother-in-law, so it's really kind of icky when you start. Don't delve into it too much. But you know, you are known nationally as the White House correspondent for CNN, but your first on-air job was in Knoxville, Tennessee, in a state that voted solidly for President Trump. And I wondered what you got from that experience that helps you understand the Trump voters of today.
Oh, that's a great question. You know, I did work my way up in the business. I started in Knoxville, Tennessee, then went to Dallas, Texas, then Chicago, then CBS, and then CNN. So I have moving boxes that have not been opened in 10 years and have stickers on top of stickers from the different moving companies. But when I was in Knoxville, I learned how to cover City Hall. I learned how to cover the courthouse, various trials, political races. And to understand the Trump voter, definitely. I mean, we would get sent off to cover bear sightings in the Smoky Mountains of Tennessee, and so we would interact with folks from the South and who were very, in some cases, very impoverished. I mean, there were parts of East Tennessee in the Knoxville area that had very high illiteracy rates. And I'm not trying to say that's how I understand Trump voters or anything, but I mean, I felt like I had interactions with all types, and it was a great way to sink my teeth into this business. And I feel like those folks there. I had a news director there who said, "Don't say it, show it." In terms of writing your stories and presenting your stories on TV, and it was a great workshop for me.
Why do you think in places like that there is such strong support for this president?
Yeah, I mean, Fred Thompson was one of the senators. You remember Fred Thompson when I was in Tennessee way back then, and you know, I think that obviously Donald Trump appeals to Southern voters. You know, I mean, we can tiptoe around the tulips, or we can dive right into it. He does appeal to a sense of white nationalism in the United States. I think down south, there's no mistaking the fact that there are still some problems with racism that we have not fully resolved, and that exists north of the Mason-Dixon line as well. And so,
do you think that they think he's going to help them in a way that other recent presidents have not?
I think that, I mean, listen, I was out there on the campaign trail in 2016, and we would see Confederate flags popping up at
So
Trump
you think
rallies.
it's more about that than it is economic security?
I think that, well, I do believe, and I know that when you get on resistance Twitter, people take issue with this whole notion that white anxiety, or excuse me, economic anxiety is what propelled a lot of Trump voters to cast their ballots in 2016. I do think that Donald Trump tapped into some of that in some of these towns where the factory closed, where there's a lot of unemployment issues because we left a lot of communities behind after the Great Recession, and he's tapped into that. He I think masterfully tapped into the issue of trade in a lot of those areas around the country, and he foresaw that, I think, before a lot of people in the Republican Party, and I think that certainly helped him in a lot of those states.
Your book is called Enemy of the People, with a great subtitle.
Dangerous time to tell the truth in America. Yeah.
And it comes from, of course, Jim's reporting at the White House. And so I want to ask you, I know there's, having covered the White House, I know there's no such thing as a typical day, but give us a sense about what happens on a typical day at the White House, if there is such a thing, because it begins before you even get there. It starts with tweets early in the morning, like 3 o'clock in the morning. Do you have to get up and check your phone?
I don't get up at 3 o'clock in the morning to check the tweets, no. But as soon as you wake up, I mean, that is a day in the life of covering Donald Trump. You look at your phone, you look at your lock screen, and the Twitter notifications are already there from him, and many of them are factually challenged. And so we have to dive right in almost at the beginning of our day to start fact-checking the president. And it is a bewildering experience because that process really doesn't stop until late at night. So I'm typically up from 6 or 7 in the morning until 11 o'clock midnight. We're chasing things, talking to sources, because it is such a chaotic atmosphere behind the scenes inside the West Wing.
Do you think he runs these tweets by anyone, particularly
No.
the senior staff?
No, my understanding is that, and I talked to Steve Bannon about this, and he said that the tweets are largely the president, and he tweets these things, and obviously they're right out of, in many cases, what he sees on Fox News. There are spelling and grammatical errors that we point out from time to time as well. But if we spent all our time covering the tweets, obviously there wouldn't be time for anything else. But I am old enough to remember, I like to say, when they said we shouldn't cover the tweets. But if
It's a question that we get a lot.
But it is a window into his mind. It's a window into his mentality and the attitude that he brings to the scene. I mean, when he tweeted, was it 2 days ago, sort of celebrating the burglary of Elijah Cummings' home in Baltimore. I mean, it's, or when he tweets they should go back to where they came from. How do you ignore those sorts of things? We have to report it. It's coming from the President of the United States.
So you walk in there, and you've already got these tweets going on. Is there still, because there used to be an early morning, what we always called a gaggle, which was not an on-camera briefing, but it took place in the back corridor of the White House press office, and usually either the press secretary or the deputy gave you a sense of what was going to be going on that day. Usually it was on background, which you all know means you can't quote by name the person who's giving you the information, but the information was usually pretty good about what happened. Do they have that, and can you use that as a roadmap anymore?
They don't have those morning gaggles anymore, and they don't have the press briefings, as we know. They no longer have those in the
we're gonna talk
afternoon
about
on
that
camera. But we do rely on a variety of sources behind the scenes who speak on background to us. The information sometimes is reliable, sometimes it's not. As we've seen time and again, he'll undercut his own staff. They'll tell us one thing, and then he'll do another. He'll tweet out of the blue that he's letting go a cabinet secretary or somebody like that, or cutting loose a pick for the director of national intelligence and so on. And sometimes earlier in the day, those same officials will tell us everything's just fine. I remember when Michael Flynn was fired, and I write about this in the book, Kellyanne Conway told reporters famously that Michael Flynn was just fine in terms of how the president felt. And then about 6 hours later, he was gone. So sometimes the staff doesn't know what the president's up to, many cases.
Look, those tweets do something that many presidents have wanted to do, and that is get the word out to the public the way they want it out there without filtering it through us. And he has succeeded in that, hasn't he?
He has succeeded in that, and he talks about that, how he wants to go over the media and speak directly to the people. And I'm not trying to put him on the same pedestal as Franklin Roosevelt, but Franklin Roosevelt, brought forward the fireside chats on the radio, and John Kennedy was sort of the master of the television medium when he became president. Ronald Reagan was known as the great communicator. So there have been times in our history where we've seen a president become sort of a master of the medium of that moment. And as I write about in the book, Steve Bannon described Donald Trump in a sort of Marshall McLuhan fashion. People who are not familiar with Marshall McLuhan, and people who are in the
This
communications
crowd is
business-
familiar with him.
Okay, yeah, who said the medium is the message, and he said, and Steve Bannon, whatever you think of Steve Bannon, he said if you look at Donald Trump in that fashion, he very much is a guy who lives through social media. He is, kind of the king of Twitter, and he has marshaled those forces very effectively, and I think that there's no question about that.
You mentioned the lack of briefings. Everyone always talks about Melania Trump as the mystery woman at the White House, but the new mystery woman is really the new press secretary, Stephanie Grisham. I found myself trying to visualize her. I looked her up on Twitter. I mean, we've not seen her or heard her. Tell us a little bit about what it's like to work with this new person. And remember, the press secretary is a really important job when you cover the White House, because that's usually the person. Again, this is a different White House, but that's usually the person that can give you at least what they want their public message to be.
Yeah. And I was in Seoul, South Korea, when Trump met with Kim Jong-un on that recent visit over there, and there was a situation where the North Koreans were trying to keep the press out. And Stephanie Grisham, you may have seen this, I reported it at the time, she was elbowing the North Koreans out of the way, the new press secretary was, to get the press back in there so they can get pictures of Trump meeting with Kim Jong-un, and we all thought this was a good start for Stephanie. I knew her during the campaign days of 2016. She was sort of the lone traveling aide who, press aide who went around the country with Trump. And, we all liked Stephanie. When she came into the White House, my understanding is she didn't like working with Sean Spicer so much, so she went over to the East Wing and worked with the First Lady. But you're right, she is sort of the mystery woman behind the mystery woman. And then she came over and became press secretary because Trump is relying on this inner circle of people who are very loyal to him, and Stephanie certainly fits that bill. And ever since then, we've been wondering, is she going to have a briefing? Are we going to have a briefing? And there's no sign that that's coming back. For folks who don't understand, we've only had about 3 press briefings this year. There were about 5 or 6 the year before. So the press briefings have essentially died. In their place, what we have now is Kellyanne Conway or somebody like that will go out to the North Lawn of the White House. They will do an exclusive interview with Fox News, and then if they feel like it, they'll walk back towards the White House and stop for a few minutes and talk to the rest of us and answer a few questions. I talked about this a little bit yesterday. Kellyanne Conway will sometimes insult the reporters who are waiting for this. And people, keep in mind, the press secretary makes $180,000 a year. Now, that's in government work, that's real money. And, the taxpayers are not getting their money's worth, as far as I'm concerned. I feel very strongly about that.
Look, in a way, couldn't you say that this president has become his own press secretary? Because he's out there on the tarmac before he gets into the helicopter, just strolling out to the White House lawn to talk to you much more than most presidents really talk to reporters. Now, and you have had some of your most famous moments with him. So, in a way, isn't he becoming his own press secretary and giving you unprecedented access?
Well, there's access and there's access. They have these sprays, as we call them, where he'll go out on the South Lawn before he gets on the helicopter, and he'll take a few questions, and the helicopter's making so much noise that you can't hear the reporter's questions. You've probably seen this. And then he'll basically answer the question however he wants. And because the public isn't hearing the question, they can't determine for themselves whether or not he's totally ignoring us and blowing past us and giving us, a bill of goods, which, you can pretty much count on the fact that he is. But, and so I do think that's a very different thing than holding a formal news conference where the reporters have a microphone, you can hear the reporter, there's a stenographer who can take all the notes. I mean, one of the things that we don't have anymore with the press briefings is you don't have a stenographer in there recording everything that's said, making sure everything is typed out. And so we don't have a public record anymore of what's being said in the driveways, for example, or on the South Lawn. That's out the window for the most part.
You've got the video of it.
We do have the video of it, but in some cases, and this has happened on the South Lawn when he comes past us, some of the crews will be out of position because it's such a mad rush to run up and get him that some of the cameras for some of the networks are out of position. So we have to beg, borrow, and steal from our colleagues to make sure we have the video and have the sound to make sure everybody has the same stuff. It's a mess.
You know,
He likes it that way. When he has a press conference and I'm given the microphone and I get to ask my questions and he gets to respond and he doesn't respond right away, and so or he interrupts me and I still have the microphone, it's a very different experience for the viewer and for the citizen, I think, than when we just catch him running off here and there. Just my view.
you know, to delve into this a little bit, your book, the important subtitle of your book is A Dangerous Time to Tell the Truth in America. So give us all the 30-second elevator pitch on your book.
Well, you know, people there are some critics on the right who have mocked this notion that, well, it's a dangerous time to tell the truth in America. How would Jim know? And they don't fully grasp, and I wish I could have written a more uplifting book or something that would have made us feel a bit more kumbaya about where we are as a country right now. But I felt the public had a right to know what we've been going through. And it's not just me, it's my colleagues, it's other journalists and anchors and so on who cover this president. I have received probably a death threat every week since Donald Trump has come into office. They flow into my social media accounts, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, which those social media sites have become a new frontier for harassing and bullying journalists. And they'll say all sorts of things, that I should be castrated and set on fire. There was one message on my public Facebook page that said, if Donald Trump is removed from office in any way, you are dead. On the day that I got my press pass back in that court case, there was a tweet that said, kill Jim Acosta, which required me to have 72 hours of around-the-clock security provided by CNN. And this has not happened to me before. Now, I have talked to reporters who have covered the president, you know, many years ago, who would say, oh, I had a death threat here, or this happened there, and so on. It's not. Sam Donaldson has told me specifically, the legendary White House correspondent who covered Reagan and so on, he said, that didn't happen when we covered the White House back. There might have been a crackpot here or there, but not at this level. And
I don't think anybody has ever seen anything at this level.
And so, you know, and CNN, I'll be very upfront about this.
But social media wasn't the way it is now.
It was not a thing back then. I mean, imagine if Richard Nixon had a Twitter account. It would have. We might have been a very different world. But you know, this is the world that we're in right now. And the thing that I get very concerned about, and the reason why I want folks to read this and understand what's happening, is our kids and our grandkids are being immersed in this culture of cyberbullying in this country, and it is toxic. It is being hardwired into their DNA. And when you see those kids at the restaurant, 2 years old, playing with the iPad and the iPhone, I'm not saying you shouldn't do that to keep your kid quiet while we're all enjoying our dinner, but they are learning how to use this technology. And what we haven't done as parents and grandparents is how not to be a jerk with these devices. And we have got to figure that out, because it is a seriously toxic effect on our political culture right now. And it is something that journalists are dealing with, and the public has no idea. And so that was one of the reasons why I wanted to write it. The other reason why I wanted to write it is I wanted folks to see what is happening to our country, what's happening at these rallies. We go to these rallies, there are people with QAnon signs. There are people with these signs and T-shirts that spread all these false conspiracy theories. Well, when you have a conspiracy theorist in chief as president, obviously you're going to have droves and droves of supporters who subscribe to the same kind of stuff. And so this whole witch's brew of hostility and anger and hatred is, I think, a serious threat to the future of this country.
You know, the nature of covering the White House is always adversarial. It's not your job to just go out there and smile and say whatever the president wants you to say that day. I don't know about you, but every day when I walked into the White House gate, I was thrilled that I was going to see history being made. And then I thought of how I was going to try to have a story that wasn't the message that they were going to try to get me to give. And that's what covering the White House is really all about on many days. Some days there's a story that's so big, an announcement so big, you have to at least tell what the announcement is before you try to go into depth on where it might be going. But wondered whether you think, as you were talking about, the fact of this adversarial situation is magnified because of the impact of social media. In other words, you doing your job, you get attacked because people can in ways they couldn't before.
I think so, and he has marshaled those forces in ways that we've never seen before. I feel as though when I walk into the White House every day, I'm watching history being unmade. I feel as though the traditions and norms that we've seen over the course of our history are just being obliterated as the rule book goes completely out the window. And folks will say, well, why is it that you ask those questions, and why is it that you're just doing it for ratings and money and so on and so forth? Well, I'm allowed to care about my country just as much as the next guy. Why can't I care about my country? And so, I feel as though if the president's going to come in there and use racially loaded rhetoric and divide up the country and pit this group against another group, he needs to be called out for that. And I think that there should be a reasonable expectation of intense scrutiny when you have a president engaging in all of these sorts of behaviors, particularly on social media. If you're telling members of Congress who are of a certain minority to go back to the country where they came from, there should be a reasonable expectation that there's going to be intense scrutiny. It's sort of shocking to me that they think, well, there's not going to be any tough questions, or it should just sound the way it sounds on Fox News. I mean, I understand they like that kind of background music, but I'm sorry, we're not here to do a commercial for the president.
In your book, there are a lot of exchanges that you show where the president accuses journalists of fake news. But you never cite the place where a journalist actually says to the president, give me an example. What are you talking about here? Have you ever asked him to give you an example of why he's calling you fake news, and what's been the result of that?
I have not asked him to give me an example of fake news. I did ask Sean Spicer one time to give me an example of fake news.
Like just one place where you got it wrong.
And I wrote about that in the book. And Sean Spicer at one briefing said, well, there was a tweet that went out from a BBC reporter that was retweeted by a U.S. reporter that got something wrong, and that's our example of fake news. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, that's the genesis for all of this? No. I mean, I think that it goes back to some extent what Trump told Leslie Stahl when he said that, I essentially call the members of the press fake news because I just want them to not do any critical coverage. And I think that really sums it up. We've gone from, during the campaign days, I write about this in the book, he called us the dishonest news media, the disgusting news media, scum, liars, and thieves, and so on. He rolled that act into the Oval Office, then started calling us fake news. And I write about this. There's one press conference in February 2017 where Trump calls me very fake news, and then right after the press conference is over, I get a call from Hope Hicks, one of his top aides, who calls and says, Jim, I just want you to know the president thought you were very professional today. And she said, and the president wants you to know that he thinks Jim gets it. And I thought to myself, wait a minute, just 5 minutes ago, he was calling me very fake news, but he tells Hope to call me and say I was professional, and then I get it. So this was very much an act. This was a reality TV show shtick that started during the campaign, got rolled into the Oval Office, and here's the thing. It's gotten out of his control. He doesn't know how to put the genie back in the bottle.
And, I love this because that was my next question to you, and you could just interview yourself. But here I am. I'm going to do something. One question, and I so remember the coverage of CNN, the breathless coverage of Donald Trump during the campaign, in a way that the President of the United States wasn't even covered. Pictures of his motorcade going to a rally. He's going to be speaking in 10 minutes. He's going to be speaking in 4 minutes. Do you think that your network, CNN, helped get him elected?
I've heard this before. And,
I watched it.
And and this was the part you were telling me you're going to ask some tough questions. Yeah. I guess we're here now.
And I haven't even gotten there yet.
Oh, my gosh. Let me just say right now, Rita, you're one of my favorite correspondents. I've watched you for so many years.
He's watched me
Sunday
since
morning.
he was a small child. No.
I wasn't going to say that.
Oh, well, okay.
You've always been one of my favorites. Let's see. How do I get out of this one? No. Listen, okay. I think the president of CNN, Jeff Zucker, has acknowledged, he did this publicly, that we probably, covered too many of the rallies end to end. I was not a part of that editorial decision making, so if I could offer that as a line for all of you. I did, I think, during the campaign, and if you go back and watch, and if you watch what I've done since then, I think I've been pretty tough on this president, and so I would hold that record up as an example of what we've done.
But that's
in
not a
addition to
question.
Yeah.
That wasn't the question.
Yeah.
The question was,
But no,
did your
yeah.
network, in its breathless coverage of Donald Trump, and all the networks,
Yeah.
but CNN on 24/7, did you feel like your network might have failed the American people in the fact that you had breathless coverage of the events, but you often didn't look behind at the person who was going to be speaking at these events?
I would say that no, I don't believe that we elected Donald Trump.
I didn't ask you if you elected him, helped elect him.
I don't think we helped elect him.
Okay.
I think if you look at the coverage, Donald Trump was almost from the very beginning of this campaign the GOP frontrunner. And I don't know how you don't cover the GOP frontrunner as the GOP frontrunner. I mean, I think that is part of it. I do think to some extent folks have sort of a selective memory as to what happened during the 2016 campaign. We didn't tell Hillary Clinton not to campaign in Wisconsin. We didn't tell Hillary Clinton to ignore Michigan, as Bill Clinton was telling Hillary Clinton behind the scenes. Donald Trump lost the popular vote by 3 million votes and just barely won the Electoral College because of a combination of states. To some extent, it was a fluke that he was elected president. We did not tell Jim Comey to put out a letter about the Clinton email issued 11 days before the election. I remember being at a campaign rally for Trump in New Hampshire, and you could just feel the momentum of that race come to a screeching halt and start moving in the other direction when that Comey letter came out. I think that had a measurable effect on the election. Had the Comey letter not come out, I think it's quite possible that Hillary Clinton would have been elected president of the United States. And I know that people might say, well, how can you prove that? I can't prove it. But I do believe that the momentum clearly shifted, and they, inside the Trump campaign, I mean, they felt, like some confidence that I hadn't seen before. One other thing I'll point out is...
Certainly what the Clinton campaign believes.
That is certainly what the Clinton campaign believes. And one other thing I'll point out, if you go back and you look at the coverage, not just from CNN, which is sort of this sort of two-dimensional caricature of our view back on the 2016 campaign, all of the networks were covering it the same way. The morning newscasts on the broadcast networks were all leading with Donald Trump. They were putting, remember, Donald Trump could call in to meet the press. Rita, you know this as a longtime legendary correspondent for CBS News. Since when could a politician call in to a Sunday morning talk show? It just isn't done. Donald Trump could do that because he was playing all of us like a violin back then. If you go back to the New York Times and look at what they were putting on their front page, I did this during the campaign. The main page of the New York Times, Washington Post, major newspapers, Donald Trump story, Donald Trump story, Donald Trump story, Donald Trump story, Donald Trump story. So it was across the media landscape. And then in addition to that, he had Fox News behind him every step of the way. And so to some extent, I do believe it was a perfect storm that got Donald Trump elected. But I think, people can, you guys can go to the produce store, get all the old produce, come back, throw them at me until the cows come home. But I will passionately defend CNN's coverage of this man and this president. I think that we've done a pretty remarkable job, and we have a lot of people working at CNN who have put a lot on the line over the last 3 years. And, we're all learning as we go along here, and I think during the 2020 campaign, you're going to see a difference in the coverage.
That'll be interesting to watch from all of the networks.
Yeah,
I
for
think
sure.
really.
But I think if you look at the full picture, it was much more than just CNN put a live shot up, and that's why Donald Trump got elected. I think that there's a lot of flaws in that logic.
You say that for you, in your book, you say Charlottesville was a real turning point. Because of the president's, somewhat ambivalent, and it almost sounded like he was supporting the white nationalists. But there's a school of thought out there, and I know you've run into it, from people who aren't extremely right-wing and even some liberals who say that the president is not, he doesn't think he's trying to give a dog whistle to white nationalists or to anti-Semites or to anti-immigration. He just says what's on his mind and he doesn't much think about it. Do you buy that argument?
I don't. No, I don't. I think that I think there's no mistaking that what we're seeing right now is a president of the United States who has made the determination that it's the best route for him politically to divide this country up and pit one group of Americans against another. I think that we saw some of that during Charlottesville. I mean, I write about this at length in the book. I devote a whole chapter to it because I think it was a real turning point in his presidency. You know, when he first came out to talk about what happened in Charlottesville, he said he blamed violence on many sides. And if you go back and watch the video, he pauses, and then he says many sides. And so he wanted to make the point initially, right off the bat, that he thought that there was blame to go around on all sides. And obviously that's not the case. He tried to come back a couple of days later, fix it.
But do you think when he does that, he's sort of winking at the white nationalist side and saying, don't worry, guys, I've got your back?
I mean, I don't know if I would put it exactly that way, but I think he is letting them off the hook. He is not assigning the kind of responsibility that is necessary when the President of the United States goes out and talks about white nationalist, white supremacist violence. That is something the President has to get right the first time. And he tried to get it right the second time, but on the second time, he was reading from the script. He was reading from the teleprompter. And we knew the next day when he was going to Trump Tower, we had to follow him. We had to chase him because this question was going to continue. And that is when he started again with blaming both sides. And that was when I write about this in the book. I said, Mr. President, the neo-Nazis started this in Charlottesville. And that is when he said famously that there were very fine people on both sides. And I did not put this in the form of a question. I said, Mr. President, there are no fine people in the Nazis. And, I still defend the way I asked that because, as a reporter, and I talk about this, there are not two sides to a story when it's a matter of right versus wrong. And this is something it took 4 or 5 times for him to get this right. And I don't think he ever did, quite honestly.
I want to ask you about that very subject because I know sometimes it's hard, and we all put ourselves in time in history when we wonder, could you possibly been objective about a totalitarian regime coming forward, or
Right.
could you have possibly been objective about an argument where one side was clearly being victimized, but you know that some of your colleagues accuse you of showboating. And I wanted to ask you what your response is to that, because lots of reporters are doing really good, solid, important work, but they are not maybe as provocative as you have been, even your own colleagues.
Well, I'll tell you a little story. When I lost my press pass and we met with our legal team, Ted Olson, who was the legendary lawyer from Bush v. Gore, came up to me and he said, Jim, grandstanding. I can't believe you were grandstanding at the White House. Who would ever think there would be grandstanding in Washington? But I think he put his finger on something, which is, come on, give me a break. But, listen, I think that, is there somebody talking back there? I hear something going on. Oh, it's another presentation. Okay.
I know. It's amazing that people wouldn't be focused on us.
No, I know. Exactly. Wait a minute.
It's unbelievable.
Come over here.
Yeah.
There's a few seats in the
What's
front.
wrong with them?
As I'm talking about questions of showboating, I'm wondering why the attention's not on me. You really should have pointed that out.
Very
Rita.
nicely done.
I mean, and here I am talking about how Sam Donaldson soothes my hurt feelings, and so on. I don't know what to say. Like Popeye used to say, I am what I am. I mean, I sort of feel like, listen, this is a rough and tumble environment. The president's calling us the enemy of the people. I think that this has created an atmosphere where, there probably needs to be a little sparring. I mean, my goodness, he's uttered some 10,000 false or misleading statements according to the Washington Post. Many of them are yes lies. And what would be our sense of the truth and reality in this world today if we just let him off the hook for all of those things? We'd be living in 1984 Part 2. We can't, I mean, there's got to be some confrontation when we're just being lied to all the time, and not just by the president, when the press secretary comes into the briefing room and just BS's everybody. I mean, when Stephen Miller tells us that the Statue of Liberty has nothing to do with immigration and immigrants coming. I mean, Rita, sometimes maybe I lose my cool a little bit just because I'm like, what the hell is going on here? What world am I living in?
But I wanted to ask you about that as well in terms of coverage, because I feel like all of the networks, including my own, are responsible a little bit. But we all get caught up in reporting the sort of outrage of the moment or the story of the moment. And so we don't go back and remind people of important stories like, that they can make a decision on, like environmental regulations being rolled back, or, as you say, a litany of things that have been proven false in the past, or the number of administration officials who have been forced to resign during the course of this administration, any one of whom in another administration, I recently was working on a story preparing, I will say we do this for all officials for an obituary of Jimmy Carter. And looking at the Burt Lance scandal, which looks so pale, and it was like a few banking regulations, and it was a story for months. And so we forget about those things. How do you get people to realize, to focus both on the story and also the context in which that moment is happening?
I think that's a great question, and it gets to the heart of what we're up against right now. We're banging up against decades of tradition in Washington where we held the presidency in high esteem and high regard. And it is difficult to set aside the tweets and the outrageous statements because they do drive the coverage. And during the campaign, and I write about this in the book, they would see this behind the scenes. They would say, oh, he would go out and say this outrageous thing. And look, we dominated the headlines all day long. Let's rinse, repeat, and do it all over again. And so some very important stories are being lost in the shuffle. I have said to our folks, I said, if we covered the border and what's happening to migrants coming across the border the way we covered the Russia investigation, I mean, that would be a hell of a story. You know what I mean? Like, look what happened in El Paso, Texas yesterday. You had somebody drive across the entire state of Texas and kill 20 people at a Walmart and then leave a manifesto that talked about, what was he talking about? A Hispanic invasion in this country. And we had this discussion yesterday where, I talked about how, at that press conference that led to the revocation of my press pass, I challenged the president on referring to that caravan of migrants coming to the border as an invasion. If you demonize immigrants, if you demonize people of color in this country, bad things are going to happen. And if all we can do is offer thoughts and prayers, government has failed. That's it. And I think that there's no question about it. So I do think that, yes, important stories are not getting enough coverage because we have to cover this guy. But I will say at CNN, we have a correspondent designated to cover climate change issues who's going all around the country and showing these things. One of my colleagues, Ed Lavandera, just did an entire 1-hour documentary on what's happening down on the border. And so the New York Times is doing some amazing work on all of these various issues, Washington Post and so on. So we're doing it, but to some extent, as consumers of information, we are so fixated, we're binge watching Trump doing all of this stuff that maybe as consumers of information, we're missing some of this other great reporting out there. And so I would say to folks, we've got to be more sophisticated as consumers of information. Perhaps put as much passion into your consuming of information as you are in directing your outrage at the media for maybe not covering things the way you would want to cover it. If I may put that out there.
I think we're about to start going to questions in a few minutes, but I wanted to ask you about something that you said during the course, and all of you know that Jim's press pass was at least temporarily revoked. The White House was soundly slapped down for that, and Jim talked about some of the fallout that he's had from the personal attacks. But one of the things that sort of came up in during the course of the argument was at one point the government seemed to be insisting that the president had the right to ban anybody he wanted to from covering the White House. What's the danger of that? Because that goes to the very heart of your book.
It really does, and I spent a lot of time talking about it because during the whole court case, and Bob knows this all too well. There was a lot of advice coming my way saying, "Hey, don't talk about this right now. We want to make sure that we keep the judge, open to our point of view and so on." And that was wise counsel. But yes, after they suspended my press pass, and remember, Sarah Sanders put out that tweet that accused me of laying my hands on this intern, that I karate. Remember the karate chop that I karate chopped the intern,
and the phony video.
There was a doctored video and so on, and the judge, fortunately in our case, eventually described that video as being of questionable accuracy. Which I enjoyed that more probably than anything else. But yes, during the case, taxpayer-funded lawyers on behalf of the Justice Department came into that courtroom in front of that Trump-appointed judge and said that the president can pick and choose who he wants to cover at the White House. If he doesn't like the coverage that you're doing, he could kick you out. And as I write about it in the book, what I thought was just a case about me getting my press pass back had mushroomed into this First Amendment challenge. If we had lost that case, governors and mayors in various parts of the country could say, we want the Dallas Morning News out of here. We want this TV station out of here because we don't like the coverage that they provide. And I think that it would have been a real chilling effect on the First Amendment and on free speech in this country. Unfortunately, the Trump-appointed judge hearing our case decided in our favor.
We are getting the signal that questions are now welcome. I hope you have them. If we haven't talked about everything, and again,
oh yes, it's you again. Oh my goodness!
We ask you.
Rita already asked your question. Sit down now.
We ask you, please,
Okay,
to just
good. No.
ask a question. Don't make a speech because we will cut you off.
And I won't yell at you or call you names or take your microphone or anything.
I have a quick question, and it's a request. Can you encourage your bosses and your brethren in the press to cover the Senate races with more energy?
Oh, sure. Yeah, we're going to do that. No question. We do that. We do that every campaign cycle. I think you're going to see some very important Senate races, and as goes
And House races too.
and House races too, and as goes the Senate, so goes the country. I think in many ways, the House, has already changed over. That happened in 2018. And I do think, yes, you're going to see a lot of Senate races getting covered, and it's going to be a big part of our coverage. Yeah. Yes, sir.
So you have lived in Trump world. Can you draw a direct line between Trump world, Charlottesville, and the mass shootings we had recently? And if so,
Yeah.
when do you begin to focus on that as domestic terrorism as opposed to people from outside the country? A. And B, your CNN moderators in the presidential debates seem to ask questions that really want to cause intra-family quibbles as opposed to asking the candidates to differentiate themselves from Trump.
Well, I think that take the second part first, I do think substantive questions were asked at our debate and the debate before that held by NBC. I think this does get back to sort of I'm not accusing you of having a two-dimensional view on things, but I do think if you look at the totality of the coverage, we did get into substance, and we're at the very beginning of the process, and you're going to see, when you have 20 candidates on stage, it's a little difficult, I think, to get into the substance as much as we would like, but as the field winnows down, you're going to see more of that.
But why wouldn't you be asking what's the difference between your healthcare policy and Trump's healthcare policy?
Yeah.
As opposed to the difference between candidate A and candidate B?
But this gets back to a little bit, if I may argue with you a little bit, and I do want to make this point very succinctly. This gets back a little bit to the public thinking that the press is here to do the work for your political party. We are not here to do the work for your political party. If the Democrats are going to spend more time attacking Donald Trump than they are, or they're going to spend more time attacking Barack Obama than they are Donald Trump at a Democratic debate, that's on them. You know what I mean? And so, to some extent, I think that that's trying to blame the press for not seeing, the end result that you would like. If I may make that point.
They don't even have to answer the question. They can just say,
That's
I'm
right.
not going to get into that fight. Here's what I want to say.
Call your favorite candidate and say, please, if you care about this, say, please stop attacking Barack Obama, who has a 95% approval rating inside the Democratic Party, than you are Donald Trump. That might be a more effective way than coming to an event and yelling at a reporter because you didn't like the way that the debate turned out.
Hi. Last night I saw the movie The Great Hack, and I also read a book called Like Wars, both of which the subject was social media, data mining, and fake messages on social media. How does the traditional media counter the persuasiveness of the social media?
I don't. I will try to answer this the best that I can, as quickly as I can. I think that we are becoming more sophisticated as consumers of information as we go on. But there's no question about it. What happened in 2016, where Uncle Fred would send you this wacky story on Facebook, and people would take it as gospel. My goodness, I would hope that after what we saw over the last few years with the Russia investigation and finding out that there are Russian bots in St. Petersburg seeding all of these social media sites with bogus information would wake people up, because that those days have got to be over. Folks they need to be aware that when you look at that link that Uncle Fred sent you on Facebook, and the website is some cockamamie collection of letters, that my goodness, perhaps you should think for a moment that that is not a reliable source of information. And so we do. I think it would be good to some extent if one of our universities or press foundations or somebody would have put out a user's guide to social media and getting information in our democracy, because it is way out of control. But we at CNN have devoted a lot of coverage to this. Not only that, but to this whole brave new world of deep fakes. This is the new thing. Remember the other day when we saw that audio slowed down of Nancy Pelosi's voice, and that was very disconcerting. But there are dark, in the dark corners of our democracy, there are these organizations that are pumping out videos and audios and pictures that are being utilized by the campaigns and their operatives to damage political opponents and even damage reporters in some ways. That's what happened with me with that karate chop video, was somebody from InfoWars had concocted this video of me, my hand motion moving much faster than it was. People need to be aware that video, audio, pictures, they're all going to be manipulated to try to damage political opponents heading into the campaign. We have to be more sophisticated consumers as we go into this campaign cycle. Buyer beware.
Next lady, before she asks a question, can you just come up and show everyone your dress? I want you to see this dress. Please. This is a dress with all our great...
You wore that dress yesterday.
Stand up. This is
On purpose.
This is a dress with all our great foremothers on it. I mean,
That's
it's
a nice
pretty
dress.
amazing. Yeah. Can you all see it? It's like great women in history. And she's
There
got
you
a
go.
dress that has it. Anyway, well, you can ask for the
Okay.
mic so everyone can hear. Thank you.
You can come find me and take a picture, as Jim did, of the artist and locate Tina yourself and get any of her products. She's a terrific, and she perfect for the vineyard. She does dog portraits. So anyway, that was that. My important question for you, Mr. Acosta, is, after I say thank you for being a hero, as Amy does, thank you.
Oh, thank you.
That was private for Jim here. Anyway, my question is, what do you make of the trial balloons that our president is floating increasingly on term limits, Ivanka dynasty?
Yeah.
And in terms of the First Amendment a moment ago, first they came for the journalists, and then we don't know what happened.
Right. No, it's a very good point. I think that when Trump jokes about, they said he was joking during that press conference in 2016 when he said, Hillary, Russia, if you're listening, if you can find Hillary Clinton's emails. Remember they said that was a joke? Now they're saying when he talks about, having a third term or a fourth term, that's a joke. Maybe we shouldn't take their word for it. It would be my response to that. Yes, ma'am. I'm going to do more rapid fire because I think we're running out of time. And yeah.
Very briefly, I can't top that dress, first of all. It's quite wonderful. But
You look great.
Thank you. My comment is simply about Rita. I just wanted to say thank you for your years of service. You were a terrific reporter. You asked great questions. You did it professionally. You did it respectfully. And there are many of us who really want to just say thank you. It's really important what you did, and it's really important the contribution you've made and you continue to make. So thank you so much.
And you noticed I said I was going to cut off speeches, but I let her make that one. It's, these things happen.
Got to let it go. You got to let it ride.
Next gentleman.
Yes.
I'm sorry. I thought you were
Yes.
moderator. Excuse me.
That's okay. Very briefly, what do you think the impact would be if the media totally ignored our president's tweets?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think that, I don't think we can do that because look at some of the things that he's put out on Twitter. I think that when the President of the United States tweets at a congressman that your district is rat infested and so on, I think that is news, and we have to, we have to talk about it. We have to ask him about it. It's a tough thing, but you do wonder what would happen if they took the Twitter away, or for a week if we took his TV away. What would our treatment be like? What would his treatment of us be like as a result of that? It's a good question, though. But I think that there's just no way to do it because it is a modern form of communication that the president is utilizing, and it's a revealing look at who he is and what he thinks. And I think that as bad as it is, we have to cover the good, the bad, and the ugly, even when it's really ugly.
When a child has a temper tantrum,
1 minute.
you really are better to ignore it.
Let me just say this, and I've said this in other places. We are not here to clean up your dirty diaper. And that falls to the American people, not the press.
We have less than a minute left. I'm going to ask I'm sorry. One final question of you, and that is it still fun to cover the White House? And do you ever have a day where you say, this was really an interesting day, and I feel uplifted by what I'm doing? Do you ever have that feeling?
Uplifting? It's very uplifting on Friday afternoon when I leave the White House. I call that the Shawshank Redemption. I spread my arms to the sky, and it's, yes, I'm out of here. No. I did have a good time covering him in Singapore. I was in the press pool that day. I followed him around with Kim Jong-un. I thought that was a very interesting experience. But I do believe that we are at a critical moment in our country's history. And more than, is this fun or am I entertained? The question I ask myself is, what is happening to America? And I asked this question yesterday, and I'll ask it again for folks who weren't here yesterday. Remember when we were growing up and our parents and our grandparents would say, I would like to leave to the next generation a better country than the one we got. Does anybody ask that question anymore? Does anybody say that anymore? No. What does that say about where we are as a country right now? And what kind of country are we leaving to the next generation, to my kids, your grandkids, if it's acceptable for the President of the United States to refer to the press as the enemy of the people? And when he's done calling the press the enemy, who is next after that? What segment of American society is next after that? And so to the grandparents and the maybe older parents who are here right now, I think, and perhaps this is a supportive audience, and so I don't want to come down too hard on you, but please think deeply about these questions, because these are the questions that I'm wrestling with every day as a reporter over at the White House, and my colleagues are wrestling with every day. What kind of country are we leaving to our kids and our grandkids? If it's okay for the President of the United States to cyberbully everybody and attack everybody and tear everybody down and get away with it and have there be no accountability, what kind of country are we leaving to the next generation? And more importantly than that, because I write about this in the book, it's not so much what Donald Trump is doing to America, it's what we are doing to ourselves. And I hope these are questions that we all think deeply about as we head into the next campaign.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rita Braver, Jim Acosta. I ask you all to make a quick exit to the signing tent, to the purchasing tent, and of course we have another speaker